Hi everyone, how's it going? So out of curiosity, I want to take the temperature of this room. How many of you are students? Show of hands. Cool. All right, hands down. How many of you are like industry professionals? Cool. Excellent. How many of you are academics? Awesome. How many of you are like something else that I didn't mention? Yeah, okay, cool. Awesome. I am really hoping that this is going to be insightful from a lot of different perspectives. So I'm just going to dive right in. So I'm going to be talking about the growth of immersive, and my font did not show up there, so it's going to be how it is, and themed experiences. So we're going to talk about some definitions, like what do I mean by immersive, where the history of this kind of comes from, some analysis about what does and doesn't work. This is going to be very informed by a lot of like my personal experiences from Star Cruiser, but I think it's broadly applicable to lots of different parks and lots of different designs. And then some like what's next, right? How do we actually overcome some of these challenges that we face? So definitions. What the heck is immersive? So I believe that immersive entertainment is characterized by the intersection of three different elements. One is the physical environment, kind of your transportative space, and that can be either digitized or it can be a real constructed space. The participant's agency, the actions and impacts of those actions, right? And then the gamification. So that's like tasks, activities, puzzles, mechanics. And here's my sort of visualization of where I think the immersive entertainment industry, like, you know, some things on that map and how it looks. So this had started out originally as a 2D map, and I was just thinking about it from a theater perspective. And then I was like, no, we need this gamification access on there because otherwise we don't really have a good place for escape rooms. And I think that those are a really valuable and viable part of the industry and show like an important space that we're moving into. So a little bit of history here. So I'm going to look at history from the perspective of a bunch of different art forms. I can tell you already that these slides are going to be messed up just looking at them. The fonts didn't look right. But that's going to be okay. Okay, so yeah, it's so pretty. It did look pretty. So in theme park world, I am thinking of kind of the roots of where some of this started in terms of interactivity, the lines blurring between guest and audience, you know, an audience member and a participant start to kind of, you see these things started to in the 80s. With Streetmosphere. So Streetmosphere was developed, so they started taking a lot of like Renaissance Fair directors and Renaissance Fair actors and bringing them into the parks to do a bunch of live entertainment. This then, there was another hallmark moment with the Adventurers Club where there was this, you know, moving between periods of scripted and unscripted immersion on a very different level than we'd seen before. Diagon saw the advent of some very cool integrated technology. We already saw some of how that works. Star Cruiser was the most integrated like live action show, as well as improvisational moments, as well as like these technology integrations that we've had to date. And I think that this is where the future of this is going. Many people who experienced Star Cruiser said that it literally raised the bar for them for what they expect out of theme park attraction. So a little bit of history here, and I just like seeing these pictures of some of this history. So the World Showcase Players was kind of one of the first advents of these types of things. Citizens of Hollywood, a very beloved group of characters. They were all interactive characters. The Adventurers Club, which sadly closed when Pleasure Island got turned into Disney Springs. Citizens of Main Street went away during the pandemic, never came back. I don't know if anyone knew about this, but there were Jawa traders who would like trade you items. It was so cool, really, really fun stuff. Legends of Frontierland, Gold Rush. This was a 2-month-long experiment that took place in Disneyland where they were essentially testing out a lot of the capabilities and interactions for something like Star Cruiser. The cowboy here is Jen Bascom, who was another immersive experience director on Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser. Jen's a hero. Y'all should write down her name. She's going to be rich and famous someday. So Jen was an actor in Legends of Frontierland. They just ran it for 2 months, and it was basically a LARP. It was like an RPG that people could play in the park. Very cool. Well, we've talked about Diagon Alley a little bit more, but I think that it's important to see, like, this was a level of immersion that people had never experienced before, and the interactivity was very powerful. So during the opening of Galaxy's Edge, not only were all of the just like your customer service staff and custodial staff, and everybody had like a character, but they also had some live interactors. These were the citizens of Batu, if you will. They were only there for a few weeks in the beginning and the opening of this thing, but you might see some familiar faces if you are familiar with some of the cast of Star Cruiser. Of course, we had Star Cruiser from 2021 to 2023, RIP, Super Nintendo World. There's some very cool integrated technologies happening with Super Nintendo World, which I think are super worth mentioning, including like unlockable secret areas that you can only get to once you've like done a certain amount of integrated gameplay. Very, very fun attractions. I really wanted to mention Phantom Peak. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this. Yeah. Phantom Peak they're doing some mind-blowingly cool stuff, including they have 10 storylines. They figured out exactly the right number of storylines for you to be able to play 5 full hours over the course of 2 days and be able to complete all the storylines in an unrushed format. They change that content every 4 months. So yeah, they're putting out new storylines with all these cool interactive characters, interactive puzzles, like all kinds of fun stuff. And they have just announced a US expansion, so we're very excited to see what they are bringing into the space. This was originally an escape room designer who then has started working on some other really big things, started Phantom Peak, and I think they're doing cool stuff. So meanwhile, in the theater world, we're also seeing this kind of like move into this immersive space, right? Starting with Tony and Tina's Wedding, which was a New York City off-Broadway show, put the audience in the role of wedding goers at this interactive theater wedding. Joe's New York City Bar, it was originally developed here in Orlando. They took it on the road. It was at Edinburgh Fringe, sold out runs. New York City, sold out runs. Incredibly cool, interactive theater. It blurred the lines between the audience and the cast. Like a lot of people didn't even know they were in a show. So Sleep No More in the 20-teens, really when it hit New York City, it started to gain an incredibly large audience and change the face of what we know as the immersive industry. So many people who are immersive experience designers really hail Sleep No More as something that was a hallmark event for them wanting to go into this industry. And then in the 2020s, we have what I call the great immersioning, where everybody starts claiming that their thing is immersive. They're like, we had an actor who walked through the aisle, it's immersive. And it's like, okay, sure. Meanwhile, in the live action role-playing world, and this is the world that I am from, I'm like a hardcore nerd. LARPing is my, yeah, Megan. So in the 70s through 90s, we had this kind of like lots of fantasy boffer games. Boffer is like padded weapons. These were inspired by a lot of tabletop role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons. Some of them were direct ports of Dungeons and Dragons, just physicalized, right? In the 90s and like through early aughts, you had this kind of different types of LARPs and genres start to emerge. Also, some of them based on like popular tabletop role-playing games. So you start to see this kind of like burgeoning of the art form. In the 2010s and teens, you see this sort of like move into really high production value LARPs and an era of like very notable, very cool scholarship that's especially happening in the Nordic countries. And then in 2022, the festival style LARP is introduced to the US for the first time. And this is Drop-In Fest US. I'm going to talk about why I think this is a hallmark moment in just a little bit. In Escape Game World, we've got Bodeborg in 95. This was one of these questing rooms. If you've never seen a Bodeborg, they're very like early escape roomy type of prototypes. In the 2000s, the first escape games, as we kind of traditionally know them today, were premiered in nightclubs in Japan. They didn't have actual like their own physical spaces, so they ran them out of like bars and nightclubs. They caught like wildfire and then took off, and then they made their way over to the U.S. market in the 20-teens. And then in the past few years, we've seen this evolution in escape room games where I don't know if you've been to an escape room lately, but they're not like they were. They are high production value. They're incredibly cool, story-driven. Many of them now have live actors. They are starting to integrate a lot of the best practices from other industries and making escape rooms like even more fantastic. So in the immersive art world, and with apologies that I did not do nearly as much research on this as our previous speaker, but I was, in the 70s, we had kind of the light and space movement where artists like James Turrell, who was mentioned earlier, started gaining a lot of traction and popularity. The weather project, Olafur Eliasson, started to get very international acclaim. This was one of the most notable international pieces with the weather project. Meow Wolf in 2008, this collective of artists created this very narrative, experiential sort of wonderland, and that has now expanded into 4 locations, and one of the coolest kind of narrative, immersive, forensic storytelling experiences around. Very inspiring to people. And then again, you have this kind of the great immersioning, where anything, it's oh, we projected Van Gogh onto a wall, and that's immersive. So, okay. And there's plenty of things that I didn't cover, but just as a brief overview, I see a lot of ties between alternate reality games, which may have started kind of by accident in the 90s, and then turned into lots of avenues and vehicles for marketing activations. And I see a direct tie to things like that and Netflix's activations like the Bridgerton experience and Stranger Things experience, and now we've got the Squid Games Trials experience, which I'm definitely going to do. And then we've got extended reality. So virtual reality has started also coming into our different areas in a big way. I think that people know about a lot of these other things, but I think one of the things I want to point out is that VR, has been a movement of VR theater that is getting put on, which is something like puppetry and VR together with live actors. It's very, very cool. So the point here is that all these art forms are kind of pointing at the same thing, right? We're all kind of trying to create this thing that we're calling immersive, right? And we don't really have a perfect definition of what that is. So here it is, it's the holodeck. We all just want to be in the holodeck. Yeah. So I want to do some analysis about why immersive is working and why it isn't. My apologies for the text on these slides. It's just not gonna go the way. It's okay. So I want to talk about agency, scalability, commercial viability, and sustainment. So on the agency front, the underpinning theory here is that people want to be active participants in their own choiceful and meaningful stories. Ideally, people want this in all aspects of their life, right? We all want agency. We want to feel like we have control over things. And in these immersive spaces, people sometimes have the opportunity to have that they don't have in their real life. So agency is key. So I think we talked a little bit about these immersive kind of audience categories. What it was mentioned, Emma mentioned before, waders, swimmers, and divers. There's this other category of sunbathers also, people who just kind of want to watch the show, and that's the level of participation they're comfortable with. I think that this is important, right? And they kind of you can move between these different categories. And when we're putting on a show, something like Star Cruiser, our goal is to get people who are waders and get them swimming, and get those swimmers and get them diving, so that the audience can also take care of each other. The 3 pillars of immersive, this was developed by the aforementioned brilliant genius Jennifer Bascom. Immersive, this is from a perspective of a director teaching this to an actor, right? It is guest-centered, it is genuine, an authentic connection is the heart of the art form, and it is about yes, yay. Unlike improv where we say yes and, yes, yay is getting the guests to give you the idea and celebrating what they have given you. So how do we know this works? Because Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser was the highest rated attraction in Disney history. Period, end of story. Thank you. So we know that this works, right? Agency, check. Okay, cool. We know something about the immersive art form that is working really well. So scalability. Sorry guys, it gets darker from here. So theme parks rely on throughput. So guest satisfaction plummets when throughput is low. So on average, Hollywood Studios has 30,000 visitors a day. So let's assume a 1:25 ratio of cast to participants. If you want 500 participants moving through your attraction, then that's 20 actors for something like that, right? And then you have to cast 5 deep because people have to work only 40 hours a week, and they have to go on vacations, and they have to have life events and things like that. So you cast 5 deep. So now you have 200 cast for an attraction of 500 participants. It doesn't scale, right? There's like a problem there. So scalability, not so good. So commercial viability. So live actors in these experiences are absolutely irreplaceable technology, which is why you're seeing escape rooms start to employ live actors in their experiences. So live actors are also expensive. So integrated information distribution systems are vital technology. And guess what? They're expensive. And your immersive environments are vital technology and also expensive. So there's a business model problem here, right? So these are some numbers that, I'm not using any insider info here. I'm using all things that are publicly available. This is a breakdown of a single voyage for an experience like Star Cruiser. So some of the big assumptions that I'm making here are that in this little thing right here, nope, you can't see my thing there. All right. So on that line item where it says PP&E, repayments on investment, I'm assuming a 10-year repayment period on a $300 million investment. So if you look at the margins for 100% capacity, they're pretty good. If you look at the margins for 50% capacity, they are very narrow. So if you aren't sure that you can fill your attraction every single time, that is not a workable business model. So commercial viability, not great. Sustainment. So as we've discussed, live actors, irreplaceable technology. But also the more content you have, the more time it takes to train new people. So that means you're never not training. So the sustainment of something like this isn't just like we're standing up a 20-minute show, somebody can learn it in 2 weeks, no problem. This is a long process, right? And also the systems that we have for a lot of these types of experiences that we know and have designs for in the theme park world don't actually work for immersive experiences. So you're constantly negotiating disparate expectations for things like contingencies, scheduling, the bounds of IP and who has creative license to make up what. Like these are big problems that we have within this industry. Also, live actors not only require care, but deserve care. So they're currently, what is supported is this performance time, right? There's enough time available for an actor to arrive on site, get into costume, and we're following like equity regulations and things like that, and then getting out. But this is not the same thing as going to a show and putting on a Beauty and the Beast costume and performing for 20 minutes. You're bell for like maybe a total of 120 minutes out of your day. When you're doing an immersive experience like this as an actor, you are embodying that character for 40 hours a week. That is a very, very different thing to ask of an actor. And in order to sustain something like that, you need to have healthy practices around getting into role and getting out of role. And those are things that are not currently supported by theme parks. Integrated information distribution systems, as we talked about, vital technology, they also require a lot of architecture. So any changes to your system are extremely fraught to deploy. There are no staging environments for things like this. So if you have to make a change, you have to deploy it into the live environment. And so you're incentivized to make as few changes as possible, and that can really impede the audience's agency, right? You have a system set up, you have that architecture, it's hard to change it. As we talked about, immersive environments, vital technology, they require maintenance. And highly specialized environments are incredibly difficult to repair and maintain. So you're locked into an extremely small set of vendors and partners, and God forbid one of your vendors goes out of business. Where are you going to get your specialized technology? Where are you going to get the parts to fix that really, really specialized item you have? You're not. So that can be a huge problem. So sustainment, hard, right? So just to review, agency, yeah, we love that. And these other parts, maybe not so great. So if everything is a designable surface, then all we need to do is increase our throughput, lower our overhead, improve our sustainment, and do that while retaining meaningful agency and satisfaction, right? Easy. Yeah, no problem. So, okay, so what's next? Like, how do we overcome some of these problems? So I have some ideas here, and I'm proud that last week somebody called them radical. I'm very excited to do that. So, okay, I posit that this integrated technology is critical for scaling, but It needs to be accessible. Shout out to Emma. Yes. Where are you? Yes. It needs to be accessible, right? So eliminate the specialization in the vendor reliance problem. This needs to be no tech for tech's sake. We need to use systems that are easy to deploy and maintain. So things like Phantom Peak are doing this already. They've got a web app, and you interact with everything on that web app. That way they can update things and change them every 4 months, which is wild. Level 99, super cool kind of escape roomy type of experience up in the Boston area. They have RFID technology, and that RFID technology interacts with all the consoles that they have for every room that you're entering into. It's absolutely brilliant, and the RFIDs, they recycle them at the end. You take them off, you put them in a bin, they use those and implement them later. Super Nintendo World has those power-up bands, as we talked about, right? Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser, not only here, but also throughout the land, you have an app in which you can interact with like tons of different things. And with some of the new innovations that are coming out, there are more and more kind of cool gameplay elements that people are using to be able to have these integrated technological experiences. So here's how something like this could work. Imagine you're at an experience, every player has an RFID wearable on their wrist. They have a mobile device that's skinned somehow to kind of match the environment. Thanks to the tech, we can geofence the area and understand both the gameplay as well as social graph. So we know what storylines you interacted with, who you interacted with, at what time, for approximately how long. We have a lot of information about this, right? Using those mobile devices, players could also share information with each other or potentially create their own storylines, create their own journeys, which is very much what people want to do. On the back end, the GMs, kind of my game masters, can see how all these things are being shared and engaged with, and they can write and deploy new storylines or support those player-led storylines in real time via a very small crew of writers' room and actors who can see new plot lines. So I posit also that counter players are the key. So what are counter players? Oh, I'm glad you asked. So there are these different roles and structures that I have identified in these different art forms, but these art forms are very similar. So interactive theater, very similar to kind of like how a top-down LARP, live action role-playing game is structured, and that is similar to how a bottom-up role-playing game is structured. So these top-down LARPs are where the content is created by a team, much like how an interactive theater or in theme park design, you have a team creating that content and then disseminating it out to an audience, right? In bottom-up LARP, you have players who create the content and they disseminate it amongst themselves, and the staff sort of oversees and administrates all these different storylines that are going on. So it's a very different type of situation. Importantly, you have this kind of cross-functional group in the bottom-up LARP scenario where you have your divers or your player GMs or your GM players. They kind of cross that boundary. They are both providing the content as well as being players in the scenario. So they are what we call counter players. So now imagine that 1:25 ratio. So you've got one actor for 25 counter players. That scales to 625 players, right? So that means that you pay one actor and you have 650 paying customers for your attraction. So that's starting to make a big difference in our playability. But also it necessitates knowing who your counter players are, right? You need to know who those people are. So you need to be able to identify them. So here's how this could work. When you're in private space, the app surfaces to you the group of people that you just interacted with, right? It's not an in-depth profile, it's just a little bit of information, maybe their in-character name and their out-of-character name. And it optionally gives you the ability to award that person kind of a kudos for a great interaction. It's not visible to them, so there's no incentive to game the mechanic for friends or social clout or whatever it is. And then staff on the back end has data visualizations that tell them who those people are, right? Who are those people who are excelling in being good interactors? And here's what I think the design schema for player trust mechanics should look like. So when a player is particularly collaborative, supportive, inclusive, creative, and theatrical, all super important for identifying counter players and good for different things, right? So we want to know what these differentiated categories are so we can deploy the right counter player to the right situation. So here's a vision for what this could look like. So with a relatively small number of actors and writers, now you can deliver and react to real-time content for and by players and ask them to distribute it. So imagine we've got like this theme park, right? In Sector 1, there's very little activity here. So we're gonna get a creative and a theatrical counterplayer to go bring an instrument and make up a song together and then perform it for a crowd. Great. Sector 2, there's a huge crowd gathered here, and we know that there's something, a big storyline is about to kick off in Sector 3. So we're going to deploy an inclusive counterplayer to go gather a group of people to head over to Sector 3, where we are about to have an actor go live. Sector 4, we have some reports here of some people who seem new to the environment, and we want to welcome them to the land. So we're going to go send somebody who's supportive to welcome them in, see if they have any questions, find a way to include them in what's going on. So let's see if this applies. Do we increase throughput? Yes. Lower overhead? Yes. Improve sustainment? Yes. And retain meaningful agency? Yes, absolutely. I think that something that is very interesting about this that Michael had pointed out to me is that the way that creative license and IP works here makes things, it just flips the script on the way that we are currently thinking about theme park attractions. So next, we have to prototype this, right? So we've got some design stages ahead of us. And some parting thoughts that I have about this are that more than ever, audiences want to play in imaginary worlds rather than just passively consuming a story. And so our job shifts to being responsive to those hopes and dreams. So it's not about designing shows, attractions, or products. Now it's about designing worlds that are accessible, beautiful, and fun to play in, and creating the tools and systems that support creative play within those worlds. I believe that this era of change is going to take place in both the physical and the digital games space, and whoever designs the best systems and worlds for creating supportive, collaborative, bottom-up driven player-created stories is going to become wildly successful, right? So that's it.